Welcome to a new episode of the brand called You. Today, I have a very, very old friend and someone who's been an absolute icon in the corporate world. Krishan Dhawan, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Mr. Krish.
Krishan is from St. Stephen's College. He's from IIM Ahmedabad. He was managing director, Bank of America. Then he was managing director, Oracle Corporation. He's founder of Impact. Until very recently, he was CEO of Shakti Sustainable Energy Foundation. My God, what an amazing career you had. Krishan, tell us a little bit about your early career with Bank of America.
Sure.
And then we'll move on to all the new good things you're doing.
Certainly. So it was, I guess, the longest and the sort of most important formative part of my working life. I spent 23 years there. I joined straight out of business school with, obviously no experience and, a lot of expectations and hopes for learning and progressing. And it was, with hindsight, a wonderful place to start. I think the banking industry was probably the right choice for me. It provided a very broad platform in terms of understanding how companies work without being too narrowly focused on any one industry. So I got the chance to learn a lot, travel. I was assigned to different cities in India, to different cities across the world. Functionally also, pursued different functions within the bank. I started in Delhi in what we call relationship banking. So my initial career was in the branches, customer-facing roles in Delhi, Calcutta, Bombay. And then I started moving overseas, and I was in Malaysia, in Hong Kong, and then I finally ended up in Los Angeles. And moved from sort of profit center roles in Hong Kong which was our regional office, to looking after regional issues around credit risk and exposure and marketing and strategy. And then ended up with in the US for 5 years with managing a significant profit center as well. So look at it with great fondness.
And how many years did you spend with them?
23 years.
Oh, that's a long stint.
Yeah, that's
a long
time.
stint. And then from there, you moved to technology.
Yes.
And when I've known you for a long time, and I often wondered, what was the transition from banking to technology?
It was, I would say, serendipity. It wasn't a plan. It wasn't something that I had sort of chalked out and said, set my eyes on. This is what I'm going to. Essentially, it happened because I moved back to India. At that stage, I moved back because my kids. I wanted them to spend some time in India in school before they went off to college. They'd been overseas for many years. My father was alone, and I wanted the opportunity to spend some time with him. So when I got back, the opportunities in banking at that stage, having done what I'd done in other parts of the world, there really weren't that many, and especially not at all in Delhi. And this opportunity came knocking, and honestly, I knew nothing about the subject. But I give full credit to the people who were, interviewing me and who took a bet on me. And we knew that pretty soon we'd know very quickly whether this is going to work or not. And fortunately it did. I spent 5.5 years there. It was quite a learning, apart from learning about databases, ERPs, middleware, and software of other kinds that this company was sort of a leader in. It was a very different culture from banking. It was very transactional, very sales oriented. You're essentially, I was managing the customer facing organization, not the technology development. And it was a completely different breed of very effective, very successful people, but whose motivation was numbers. But I relied on what I had learned in terms of how to manage teams, manage people, manage relationships. And as to reflect, there's a quote from Samuel Johnson about a walking dog. And it goes that it is an amazing, the amazing thing isn't how well he's doing it, but that he's doing it at all. So to sort of reflect on that, on my own self, that it wasn't that it was getting along quite well, but the fact that I was even doing it. And it just, I think, proved to me, obviously there's no substitute to technical knowledge, but there's very smart people out there who have that technical knowledge. that certain, I think, management principles do translate across sector. And as I mentioned, it's about relationships, people, and understanding the business model. And in some ways, I would say, ignorance also helped, because I needed to, for my own sake, distill something fairly complex, the value proposition that the company was trying to offer, into something that was understandable, first to me, and then to the non-technical clients that I would also meet. I mean, our sales teams would be meeting the chief technology officers, but in my role, I had to spend more time with CEOs and CFOs, and explain to them in simple terms. And it worked really well.
Absolutely. I mean, I remember when you had joined Oracle, someone had asked me this question, and I said, listen, I moved after 17 years with ITC into aerospace. I didn't know what was aerospace, but I led teams, launched huge satellites for 8 years. And I commented to somebody, I said, Oracle will change when Krishan goes there, because he'll bring a very different perspective which a tech company needs. So I think what you're saying is absolutely right.
And, like many industries, it was inbred.
Correct.
There's nothing wrong with that. So, when I started talking about relationships versus transactions, people's eyes would sort of glaze over initially. But, I persisted. And it was an interesting time in Oracle's history. It was going through some major acquisitions as well. So that added further complexity, because we were acquiring companies globally and we had to fold them in. And, it was always a large base for their operations. So I think when I joined, the company, not directly working for me, but the company had about 5,000 people. By the time I left, we had 20,000.
Wow.
So it was...
Wow. That was not
significant.
So, moving on, I mean, when I was reading about you, in 2003 is when you first got involved in the NGO space. I think, and that was when you founded Impact.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit about Impact.
So it was not just me, it was me and a group of classmates from IIM Ahmedabad. So we got together after a very long time on our 25th anniversary, which was 2003. And, we had spent years working on our careers, etc., and had, all sort of reached a certain stage in life. So between being more reflective and possibly too many drinks while you're having, a party, everybody said, we got to do something, and we got to do something to give back. I think the remarkable thing is for this initiative that it lasted. It took shape, it took form, and it thrived. Because when I meet many other alumni from either business schools or engineering schools, who tend to have regular alumni meetings more than say colleges, they all say they're resolved to do something, but it doesn't get off the ground. So I think it's a credit to the group of people I was working with that we stuck to it. It wasn't easy, for a variety of reasons. And we have a functioning and thriving organization, and we've gone through some major transitions where the initial group has now chosen to step back. The initial management group has also stepped away. We've professionalized, and we've actually inducted a group of people 10 years junior to us from the same institute to sort of take over as part of the succession planning. So essentially what the organization, and it took a while for us to decide, it's easy to say we'll do something to give back, we'll do something worthwhile, but there's so many things you can do. And I think the important thing is to have, a narrow and clear focus of what you're trying to achieve and why and what were the outcomes. So our decision at that time was what we could probably do best for society was to address the issue of illiteracy among women in certain communities and sections of society. Because we believed that by educating the half of the population that wasn't getting this opportunity, the long-term benefits would be huge. So we started with modest ambitions, was to impart literacy, read, write, do some arithmetic, to young girls who were out of school and were not likely to be put into school for social, family, economic reasons in rural communities. But the biggest learning for us over, after we completed 5 years and 10 and now 15, is how much more we've achieved than just imparting literacy, and how much we've changed these young women in their own eyes, very importantly, in the eyes of their family, in the eyes of their community. They've really given them a sense of self, a sense of what they can achieve, and what they can aspire to. And now most of the girls, our program was primary, grades 1 to 5. Almost all of them go to middle and high school, and many of them go to college. And
you see them through the entire?
We formally see them only to that first 5-year period, but informally we keep track, because through the community. And our greatest delight is that some of our own products are now coming back to teach at our own establishments, sort of completes sort of circle for us and validates that. And keeping our management hats on, we wanted to create a model that was scalable and replicable. So we started with about 300 girls in some villages in Rajasthan, in Alwar district. And now we have almost 50,000 girls in 11 states. And it's a model that we know we can scale and we can replicate. We only go where there's a need. So we do an assessment and see where there's a gap between male and female literacy levels. And it's just been wonderful. And the most wonderful experience is actually visiting a village and visiting these girls. And not only the girls, their mothers and their fathers, and the pride with which.
So a lot of the girls who you initially taught, they must be now becoming responsible members of the society.
Exactly.
Have you got any examples of some successes?
So one ongoing, I think, success is, and one of the ills that impacts the communities we work in, is child marriage, or marrying girls at a young age. And the amazing thing is that once the parent puts the girls in school, that's taken off the table. And we've seen even within the same family, if there are two sisters, the one who isn't going to school may get married at 12, 13 and have her first child at 15.
And that's still going on?
It's still prevalent. And, we're sitting here in modern Gurgaon. You can go an hour and a half from Gurgaon into Mewat. It's a different world there. So, keeping girls unmarried until they're of the right age, having their first child until they're the right age. And then many of them could have never aspired, their mothers certainly could never have aspired to working, they're teaching, they're joining the police, they're taking on jobs. And I think, they're becoming mothers themselves. And as educated mothers, I think their approach to hygiene, to nutrition, would be very different to how, they were brought up.
Amazing. And impact with its spelling, I just assumed was IIM.
Exactly. There was a play.
Initially, I thought it was a mnemonic, but then I said...
No, it was a play on the fact we were from Impact and trying to make it... Sorry, we were from IIM and trying to make an impact.
Okay.
So some people pronounce it I Impact, and I said, actually, it's, that's okay to say I Impact, but actually it's Impact.
Wonderful. And, how does someone get associated with this organization? Either directly involved or as a donor?
So, as a donor, it's very simple. Okay. We have a website, we have portals. If you're a resident Indian, if you're a foreigner, there are different gateways for that. For an NGO, funding is the lifeblood, and it's always a challenge. There's one thing we can never take for granted. We started small with, friends and family and ourselves. But fortunately, we've been able to grow our funding base both within India and offshore. So, we welcome, as people can fund, Give India and other platforms, or go directly to the website, impact.org. In terms of other kinds of involvement, experience shows us that people do express it, but then what we need is sustained and both in terms of it's continuous and there's a certain sort of quantum.
Correct.
It's very difficult for any organization to accommodate people who just sort of drop in at will and say, how can I be of help?
And become an advisor.
Yeah. And we have enough advisors. We're a group of MBAs.
Correct.
We have just more advice from each other than we need.
I agree with you.
That being said, we've selectively take young people on for a couple of months of people, still in school, about to go to college. They want to sort of come and give full-time, input for 6 weeks, 8 weeks. There's always a way. But just dropping in for advice.
Yeah. Understand. No, completely understand. Because a lot of people do keep expressing the need.
Yes.
And I understand fully, because I tell people you can either contribute with your checkbook,
Yes.
Which is one way to do it, or get fully involved.
Yes. Fully is,
Don't give lip service.
Yeah. Fully is the important
I
word.
agree. So, Krishan, moving on to your next initiative,
Yes.
which is the Shakti Sustainable Energy Foundation.
Yes.
Talk to us a little bit about.
Sure. So that actually, I think, is obviously the most current. I just stepped down after 7.5 years, and probably the most interesting thing I've done, because, I mean, at the end of the day, be it banking or software, are fairly established lines of work, and a lot of people do this. So this was new in many respects, both for me personally and also for the environment in which we work in. So firstly, it was working in climate change mitigation and clean energy.
Okay.
Things like renewable energy, energy efficiency, sustainable transportation, etc. And two, it was about working at the policy level. In terms of trying to work at the macro level, try to create the right policy framework so the right investments take place. So we were a foundation. We got money and we gave away money. We weren't what I'd say a passive foundation. We were a very active foundation in terms of we helped design programs and work with our partners that were typically think tanks and in other NGOs. And we also were involved in the advocacy. Okay. So when we produced some intellectual output as a result of the funding investment we made, we were very much part of the process to get it, buy-in from the government, get them to understand what the object here was and how they could help. So when I started in 2012, this organization had just been set up. It was a fledgling, small organization, not very large budgets or staff. And climate, if you sort of think back, in 2012, was not a subject that either most people understood or took very seriously.
Correct.
For better and for worse, that situation has changed today.
Okay.
I think people realize the severe impact climate is having on our lives, and the urgent need to act. But that's recent in the last few years. And in India in particular, it wasn't a subject that got any traction. So one was jumping into an area that nobody really cared about or understood and wondered what the heck is going on. So I think fortunately, with a lot of again perseverance, I'm building a great team, developing great partners, having good funding support. We have been able to sort of create awareness, create ambition to do something, and then incentivize action, which were the three things. So I think over the last few years, there's been far more engagement on and ambition and action on renewable energy, on efficiency, on clean transportation, on the need to work on climate change, because it isn't a foreign concept.
Correct.
That's it's something that we, as actually India, is probably the most susceptible to, and we have to balance our development needs and aspirations, which are paramount. But one can do so in a way that's conscious of the climate impact it makes.
Okay. And when you talk about advocacy in all these areas, what is the process that you would follow? I mean, would you just reach out to the government, or would you
typically
have some activists?
So no, our approach, there are two approaches. One is an activist approach, and one is going straight to the policymaker. Our assessment was that for a variety of reasons, going through to impact the policymaker was probably the most appropriate one for us, because there was a lot of the areas we worked in, there was no policy. It wasn't as if there was a bad policy or the wrong policy, because they were so new. I mean, people who knew solar energy would be,
I agree.
a real viable alternative to conventional energy. So, there was just no provision. So our ambition was to create, there was this white space to fill in the gaps in that white space. And for that, I must give credit, especially in the current government, for the receptiveness. People, you have to obviously establish credibility. There's an underlying unease in our system with foreign funded initiatives, and we were essentially foreign funded philanthropically. So one has to establish one's bona fides, that the agenda we were looking at are consistent with India's agendas of sustainable development, energy security, and growth. So one had to first work at the federal level, which is where overarching policies need to be put into place. And then as those spaces got filled in, started working more at the state and at the city government. And it wasn't always easy, but over time, I think it worked really well.
So let me move on to another section of our program. Yes. That is a few questions about you and, but even before that, you and I are of a similar vintage. And, there are a lot of people in this country who are now reaching 60 or 58 or 59. And retirement is something that people in India don't like to talk about. It's almost like a taboo. You did a phenomenal transition from the corporate world into an NGO space and are now involved in so many things. And yet I'm sure you know so many people who are not preparing themselves. What would your advice be to people who are in their early 50s, mid 50s, who probably are going to have 30, 35 years ahead and are not ready?
Yeah, and I think those are excellent points. I think many of us are colored by, the experience of our parents who did retire at 60.
Correct.
It wasn't really,
there were not too many options.
There weren't too many options. It's also a mindset issue. It was, the whole system expected you to do that. So I think many of us, I hope, are far healthier today, this generation, or at least more conscious. So, we have the physical abilities.
Okay.
And as important, I think one has the mental desire, to continue to be active and productive. And I really believe that if you want to remain healthy in the complete sense, you need to have both that physical and that mental sort of engagement. And certainly without the mental engagement, you will start impacting.
Yeah.
But I think different people can react to age and time differently, or react to the specter of retirement separately. I think some need a narrow, well understood, regimented sort of routine, and some are quite happy with the freedom they have, because again, I would hope that by this age, your material needs are pretty much taken care of. Your kids, the usual thing, settled. Your parents, maybe around, may not, but so you're actually, it's quite liberating,
Absolutely,
honestly.
Yes.
So I think one should view it as a liberation and not as a sentence, that you have to serve out. So I think it's up to each individual to, and it's okay, because I think most people can work till they're 70 or 75. There's no reason to stop at 60. Health doesn't come in the way. But how you define work is, I think, up to you. And I would encourage people to use your imagination and pursue things that will keep them engaged. And often you say, "Oh, I wish I had the time. If I had the time, I would have done this." I can say woulda, shoulda, coulda, something. But now you do. So now it's in your own control, and
Yeah, that's very, very well said, because it's incredible. You spoke about health, etc., and I've often said that retirement or superannuation has nothing to do with you. It has to do with the policies of your employer.
Yeah.
And given good health, we probably will live till 90.
Yeah.
So your life post 60 will be almost equal to your working life.
Exactly.
What are you going to do?
Exactly. So you really need to start thinking about that. And it's a wide open canvas, and it's up to you to set the scene.
Correct. So next question too is, a lot of people, and you spent so much time with the NGOs. A lot of people say that, when I retire, I want to do something with NGOs.
Right.
You have spoken about getting fully involved.
Right.
But any advice to them? Should they start their own? Should they join someone new?
Again, I think all of the above. I think starting anything new, be it a business venture or an NGO, is tough. You need a lot of focus, a lot of energy, and a lot of perseverance. But if there's a niche that you believe you can best fill, and that nobody around you is doing it, and it's something that you're passionate about, go for it. But it isn't easy. It's as difficult, or in some ways more difficult, than setting up a business. Because in business, as long as your revenues cover your costs, you're okay. But in an NGO, you're always looking for funding. You have to make a case to other people because, by definition, I'm assuming it isn't self-funded. You need external funding. So actually, if I can digress, one hears about incubators a lot. And incubators are often associated with technology companies and now with impact investing. But in my days at Shakti, we were dependent on NGOs to be our grantees, to whom we could give money to get our work. And one of our biggest constraints was there weren't enough NGOs working in the area that we wanted to work in. So we actually set up an incubator at the Indian School of Business and did a call for proposals and got people who had good ideas and wanted to set up an NGO. But it was actually very difficult because if you have a good business idea, you can get investors. Nowadays, if you have a good impact idea, you can get investors, and help. Investors is after you get the help. But if you looked around, if you wanted to set up an NGO and you wanted some assistance, there was nowhere to go. So I think, there's a lot that can be done. But, there's so many large established organizations that are doing lots of good work. You can take your pick: health, education, what have you, climate, energy. And, they're looking for good people. I know, having run and staffed one, if I could get, again, commitment's important. If somebody who's 60 says, look, these are the skills I bring. It could be in finance, it could be in administration, it could be in sales or whatever. But I guarantee you that I'll be with you for 5 years or even better, 10. Would you have an opening for me? And this is all I've achieved in life. You'd say, yes, of course, because, it's the social sector doesn't rely on its great salaries to attract people, right? So if you have an individual who salary isn't the main motivation, I think the organizations would be very grateful and happy to have that sort of.
Very interesting. No, I think that's a very, very interesting comment you've made, and I'm sure a lot of people will hear this. If you have skills, come out and make the offer. But as long as you're willing to commit time, I think that's most important.
It's just like, when you ran a company, if you hired somebody, you wanted that person to stay there. It wasn't that when he felt like it, he would come in. And when he didn't, he wouldn't come in.
True. So, Krishan, my last question to you, and I ask this question to all my guests because the people who hear us somehow believe that successful individuals don't have failures. My question to you is, what have been your learnings from your failures?
So I think when you go through downs, you tend to, at least I did, pick up all these sort of sayings that, you tell yourself, and especially when you come out of it. But one of my favorites is that what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. So, I think downs as well as the ups are in everybody's fortune. Some can be much more extreme and some will be less so. And I think having some down experience actually is good for you. It does make you strong. Because otherwise, you just fall apart if you didn't have that strength. And the other saying is a nautical one, that if you're sailing a boat, I'm not a sailor, but if you can't change the wind, trim your sail.
Okay.
So there again, success in definition often or failure is often a definition that is in your own control as well. You have to determine, and you can't rely on other people to determine it for you. And if you want to head east but the wind's blowing in your face, then okay, let's head north, and maybe we'll find land there, sort of thing. So I think being hopeful, being optimistic, and hanging in there, and learning to deal with your own disappointments, I think is extremely important.
Terrific. Krishan, thank you very much.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Your words of wisdom, I think, will be heard by hundreds of thousands of people. Thank you very much, and good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You podcast. Be sure to visit tbcy.in to join the conversation, access show notes, and discover fantastic bonus content. You can follow us on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Simply search for the Brand Called You. Thank you, and see you next week.